today in class you completed this chart with the exception of one part, and that was the very bottom right down here. Okay, I'm going to blow this up on another slide, so let me pull that up and do that right now. Okay, so we're going to know that we're on the right slide because at the end, you're going to see the end of this line look like an arrow. Okay, and that was a really crummy job right there that I made it. Okay, so whatever. Alright, so here we go. Alright, this is what the very bottom of your paper looks like. So in order for you to make it match identically, you need to write timeline, and don't write it huge, but write timeline above this little line that I was talking about that has an arrow on the end. Okay, because we are going to be doing a timeline right now, because our standard says, trace the transition from tyranny and oligarchy to early democratic forms of government. Alright? So the best way to trace the transition from tyranny and oligarchy to early democratic forms of government, I think, is to do a timeline. So that's what we're going to do. Alright, so you should have timeline written there now. Let me get rid of these little marks. And remember, you can pause the video wherever you want to write this stuff down. Alright, here we go. Let me switch a couple things around here. Okay. The first thing that we're going to put on our timeline, and remember we are looking for dates and we are looking for information. So we're going to put our first one right about here. Okay, so if you want to make a little line there, you're going to label this 2000 BC or BCE. Now, the first thing in 2000 BCE that we need to know is that most city-states were ruled by monarchs. So you are going to write this information right here under 2000 BC or BCE. Most city-states were ruled by monarchs. So in this case, in 2000 BCE, we have a monarchy. That is our type of government. We talked about that in class today. That's a king or a queen that rule. Okay? Alright, second thing that we're going to add up here, and I'll go through these and then go back to them in a moment, is we're going to put our next line right about here. Okay, right about here. And our fact and our date is going to be 800 BC or BCE. And we're going to write the information in that says that most city-states were ruled by oligarchs. So we know from that word that we must have an oligarchy. So this is the form of government that we have in place in 800 BCE. So you want to make sure you get your date written down and your fact. Alright, next one. Right here. Our next date is 600 BC or BCE. And our information says that most city-states were ruled by tyrants. So now we know that in 600 BCE, we had tyrants that were ruled. So, ooh, that was terrible. We have a tyranny. And we wrote the definition of that down on our chart today in class. Alright, and last one. We're going to put our line right about here. And our date is 500 BC or BCE. So 500 BC or BCE. And the information that we need to write down about this one is that most city-states were ruled by the people in a democracy. So now we know powers of the people. We now have a democracy. People had a say in what was going on. So now we see on our timeline that we have made our way from 2000 BC, when we had Greece was under a monarchy, a form of government, monarchy. Then, several years later, in 800 BC, we have now an oligarchy. And we talked about each one of these. They're on that very chart that you have in front of you. So if you don't remember what an oligarchy is, then you should be looking back at the video that I made earlier, because it tells you on there what an oligarchy is, and you should have it written as your definition. Alright, so then, several years later, we now find that Greece is ruled by tyrants. So we have a tyranny. And then, just 100 years after that, we have 500 BCE, when most city-states were ruled by people in a democracy. And then we move on. Alright, so we'll be looking later on in history at what the other forms of government were in Greece. So we have now traced the transition from tyranny and oligarchy to early democratic forms of government. So tomorrow in class, I'm going to be looking for these dates on your timeline, and I'm going to be looking for these facts that you have written down on your timeline. Okay, and it is for a grade. Now, we're going to be talking about this a little bit more in class tomorrow or next week. So you need to make sure that you keep up with this and that you put it in your packet where your chart should be already. All right, I think that's it. See you, bye.